welcome to the second of the series of online weekly seminars for the theory and practice in the blockchain. My name is Pedro Moreno Sanchez, and today I will be the session chair for this session, where we will have one keynote followed by 3 fantastic talks about scalability layer 2 protocols in blockchains. And without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Ari Jules from Cornell Tech, who has done fantastic and really extensive work in many areas of blockchain technologies. And today he will be giving us a keynote about decentralized identity. So the floor is yours, Ari.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so I'm going to talk today about decentralized identity, and I'm going to focus on a system called Candid, which was developed in my group jointly with Andrew Miller's group and with colleagues at JPMC. But before I begin, I want to talk a little bit about what decentralized identity is and the motivation behind exploration of this area. Nearly all of us have had
Ari, I'm sorry, Ari, but we are not seeing your slides. If you were expecting us to see it, you're not sharing them yet.
Okay.
So you need to share them.
Well, when we tested, I think it was going the other way again. We tested the other speakers and this kicked out our slides. So you just have to start sharing again.
Exactly.
Okay, I just have to restart.
Great.
Is that working?
Yeah, now we can see them. Perfect.
Now you see them? Okay.
Sorry.
So nearly all of us have had the experience of opening a financial account online of some type, perhaps even a cryptocurrency account. And often what you need to do is to validate your identity in a video. You show your face with an identity document that contains your name to prove your identity, but you don't do it like that because then your fingers are covering the identity document. That's no good. And no, you don't do it like that because then the identity document is covering your face. So yes, you want to do it like that, exactly like that, hold still, or you could potentially do it like this. The point is that this process of proving your identity via video in a manual way is cumbersome, and it's also prone to fraud. And this is part of the motivation for exploration of decentralized identity. So what is decentralized identity? The basic idea is as follows. A user to create an identity document generates a public-private key pair, and then an authority known as an issuer creates a credential, as it's often called. This could be an identity document, say a driver's license, if the issuer is the Department of Motor Vehicles, and binds this document to the public key of the user. The user then, if she wants to present this credential or document to a third party, say Alice here wants to take out a loan and she needs to prove she's, say, over 18 and a resident of the state of California, the user does is present the identity document and use the private key to prove that this is indeed her document, to prove possession, ownership of the document. And then she gets her loan or whatever else she's using the document for. This basic idea, this basic approach is, as it turns out, very powerful, something you'll see in the course of this presentation. And the notion of decentralized identity has been embraced by a whole bunch of different organizations. There are several standards efforts afoot in the tech industry to promote its use. One of these efforts is known as the Decentralized Identity Foundation and counts among its members dozens of companies. These include tech companies, of course, but also financial services companies, insurance companies, and so on and so forth. So interest in this basic idea is, as it turns out, quite broad. Why is this interest so widespread? Well, decentralized identity has several goals. One is to improve the experience of a user in, for instance, setting up an account online to do away with the problems that I mentioned at the beginning of the talk. Another is to help reduce fraud, another problem that I mentioned at the beginning of the talk. There's a challenge involved in ensuring that an identity document presented remotely by a user is authentic. And this is something that decentralized identity can help with. Another slightly more subtle benefit of this approach is that it empowers users to manage their own data. Notice that Alice, in presenting her identity document to take out her loan, had to initiate the process of sending the relevant data to the bank. She controlled her identity document, she controlled whatever sensitive information it contained. And this control can extend to other credentials and to a wide range of sensitive data. Additionally, with decentralized identity systems well in place, it would be possible in principle to issue credentials relatively straightforwardly to disenfranchised persons, stateless persons, refugees, and so on and so forth. Aid organizations could easily issue identity documents. Why are enterprises, though, particularly interested in this technology? All sounds good for users. Why are enterprises signing up for standards efforts like the Decentralized Identity Foundation is creating? Well, a benefit of having users control their private information is that that information doesn't need to be stored by service providers. And this reduces the liability of enterprises that would otherwise have to handle the sensitive data, in particular liability in the case of a data breach. This all sounds good, but there are a couple of critical problems swept under the rug in pretty much all of the standards efforts we've seen in this space. The first is the problem of this issuer here. Right, so I said an issuer, like the Department of Motor Vehicles, creates a digital document, identity document, and binds it to the public key of the user. But where are these issuers going to come from? Right? It's unlikely that the Department of Motor Vehicles in the state of California is going to become an issuer of decentralized identity documents until there's a decentralized identity ecosystem in place already, right? Until they're users of these documents. But on the other hand, there can be no users of decentralized identity until an ecosystem has been created. So in effect, we have a chicken and the egg problem here. We're not going to have issuers until we have users. We're not going to have users until we have issuers. This is one key problem and one key obstacle to the realization of decentralized identity. A second challenge is that of key management. We know that users have a great deal of difficulty managing their secrets, passwords, for instance. Now, this is perhaps doubly true in the case of private keys. Just one data point here. It's estimated that something like 4 million Bitcoin, and I haven't checked the price of Bitcoin in the last 2 minutes, so I don't know how much this is worth, but say 160 billion or so, has vanished forever because people have lost their private keys. And just this past month, there was an article about a man who lost 7,500 Bitcoin as a result of the storage of his private key on a hard drive he'd thrown away, and he was appealing to his to town hall to allow him to trawl the local garbage dump to try to recover this hard drive. But this problem is pervasive. In fact, the key management problem is so challenging that what we see is centralized financial systems becoming decentralized in many cases through Bitcoin and other systems, which is very nice. But then users, because they don't know how to manage their private keys, or I should say, because it's so challenging, making use of services like Coinbase. In other words, re-centralizing what was supposed to be a decentralized system and undermining the very value proposition of a system like Bitcoin. Yet another problem that gets swept under the rug is the challenge of ensuring that a decentralized identity system is Sybil resistant. we want it to be easy for users to obtain identity documents, but we don't want it to be too easy in the sense that we don't want a single user to be able to obtain multiple distinct identity documents, or to obtain different instances of the same identity document in such a way that the user can pose as multiple people. This would be problematic as well, particularly in applications like voting. So that's just to give you a flavor of what decentralized identity is all about and what the main technical challenges are. Before I discuss our solution, the candid system, I need to talk about a critical building block called DECO. And I'll do this at some length because this really is the cornerstone of candid, the system I'll discuss later. Right. Here's the problem that DECO attempts to address. Let's imagine we have our two canonical characters here, Alice and Bob. And Bob in particular has created a new token called Bob's Bubble Token that he would like to sell in an initial coin offering. Alice comes along and she'd like some Bob's Bubble Token. But Bob is a conscientious guy. He doesn't want just anyone buying his bubble token, and in particular, anyone who doesn't really have the financial means to participate in the ICO. So Bob requires that in order to participate, you need to have at least $5,000 in liquid assets. Alice here goes online, looks at the balance of her bank account, discovers that indeed she has more than the requisite amount. She has more than $5,000. Right? So she says to Bob, you know, I have more than $5,000. I'd like to participate in your ICO. Bob's natural response is, okay, that's great. Can you prove that you have a balance of more than $5,000 in your bank account? Well, Alice can try to do this in a number of different ways. One is to send Bob a screenshot of her account. But of course, this doesn't work terribly well, right? Because screenshots can easily be manipulated. Alice can Photoshop her balance up to whatever amount she wants. So this simple idea obviously doesn't work very well from a security perspective. Alternatively, Alice could send her credentials, her username and password, to Bob so that he can log into her bank account on her behalf and check her balance directly. This would work from an integrity standpoint, data integrity standpoint, in the sense that Bob would indeed be able to determine Alice's true balance. But it has another problem, namely that this isn't a good way for Alice to keep her balance above $5,000. Right? Bob can just steal Alice's money. What we would like ideally is Alice to be able to get a proof of some kind from the bank server that she can present directly to Bob. And it would seem like we should be able to do this because when you log into your bank account online, you're connecting to the bank over a secure channel, over TLS. Right? And this channel makes use of public key cryptography and a protocol that ensures data integrity and confidentiality between the user and the bank. But with all of this cryptography at play, and particularly public key cryptography, it would seem like Alice should somehow be able to construct a proof for Bob. The problem is that although the key exchange in TLS makes use of public key cryptography, the exchange of data in the record layer makes use of symmetric key cryptography. In other words, Alice and the bank actually share the keys that are used to secure the data. For example, to ensure integrity, the data may be MAC'd. Right? There may be a message authentication code, symmetric key signature attached to the data. And this effectively means that Alice is equally able to create valid looking data on this channel as the bank is. So forwarding TLS data to Bob is basically no better than a screenshot, because we can't take advantage of the security in this secure channel. So another approach that's been proposed to the construction of proofs of the type that Alice would like here is to modify TLS. Because of the use of public key cryptography in the key exchange, because of the use of public key cryptography for Alice to determine that she's actually communicating with the bank, servers already have certificates. And they can, in principle, digitally sign data using the private keys associated with those certificates, right? In fact, they do for the key exchange, typically. So various approaches to modifying TLS to take advantage of this fact have been proposed. A very nice one from ETH Zurich called TLSN, for instance, suggests modifying the server to allow for digital signing. OpenID Connect does this in practice, unfortunately, only to a limited extent, only for certain types of data and with limited forms of privacy. The problem with this approach in general is that it requires big infrastructure changes. It would be very nice to have digitally signed data emitted by TLS natively, but this isn't likely to happen in the near future. And in consequence, the data we would really like to have in a decentralized identity system is often locked up. Right? You can't prove to somebody directly that your bank account balance is above $5,000. You can't present your driver's license in digital form. You can't present data like a credit score, right? All of this is essentially sitting behind a wall somewhere. All the data are siloed as a result of the way that TLS works. Our approach to this lack of accessibility for private data today is a system called DECO. The idea is as follows. A user like Alice can connect to a server over TLS and then prove things in zero knowledge about the content of her session with the target server. So for example, Alice can log into her bank and prove to Bob in zero knowledge that she has more than $5,000 without actually showing her bank account balance. Right. But didn't I just say that TLS can't do this? We sidestep the lack of a native capability of this kind in TLS in the following way. Let me show you what's going on under the hood. The key idea is something known as a three-party handshake. And the basic idea here is to split the session key between two parties, a prover and a verifier, rather than the user, as in the typical scenario, holding this key entirely herself. The key will be split between the prover and verifier for reasons I'll explain in a moment. Normally in a TLS key exchange, the client, Alice here, generates her own private key, at least in some versions of the protocol, and a corresponding public key. And she presents this public key to the server for the key negotiation. But as I said, she holds this private key herself, and she obtains a session key to be shared with the server. In the three-party handshake, what happens is the following. The verifier, Bob in our scenario here, generates his own private key and corresponding public key, and he sends his public key to the prover. The prover then generates her own private key, and she combines her private key with the public key that Bob has presented to construct a joint public key. What we get out of this is a private key, X here, that is the sum of private keys held by the prover and the verifier. In other words, we have split the private key that the client, in the view of the server, is presenting to the server for key negotiation. And the result of this is the following. Alice and Bob can now generate a shared session key for the TLS session, which the server holds in its entirety. And they can use this key, this session key, in a secure manner. For example, they can decrypt data sent to Alice, provided that they cooperate. They use secure two-party computation in particular, and I won't get into the details here. They can jointly decrypt data intended for Alice. But Alice has no way now of forging data, a piece of data D, from the server. I mentioned that in the standard usage of TLS, Alice holds the key K and therefore can forge data because she can construct a match MAC. She can't do that now because she doesn't actually know K. Again, through cooperation, Alice and Bob can do things like enable Alice to prove facts about this piece of data D, and she can do this in zero knowledge desired. A really important observation here is that this process of splitting the key on the client side between Alice and Bob is transparent to the server. There's no modification to TLS, and the server actually has no idea that this joint protocol is taking place. This two-party protocol is taking place between Alice and Bob in the background. Right? As far as it's concerned, it's just talking to an ordinary client, just talking to Alice in particular. Right. This approach gives us a somewhat refined picture, or enables a refined picture of how DECO works. Right? Alice and Bob now engage in a three-party handshake when Alice sets up a session with the bank. And when she receives data from the bank now, she can send a zero-knowledge proof to Bob about facts regarding the data she's received. That's in the case where Alice is just trying to prove something to a single verifier, Bob. This concept is even more powerful when you consider its use with a committee of verifiers, like an Oracle network in the blockchain setting. Now what Alice can do is log into her bank account and prove things individually to all of the nodes or some subset of the nodes in the network. This subset of nodes, having received a proof from Alice that her bank account is above $5,000 in this example, and these nodes can sign a statement to that effect. They can jointly sign a statement to that effect that becomes a decentralized identity credential. So this network can verify that something Alice is claiming is true and enshrine that truth in a document that Alice can then present to third parties like Bob or a bank from which she wants a loan. Now, DECO operates on a purely cryptographic basis. There's an alternative way to achieve something very similar. We take this alternative approach in a system called Town Crier. What Town Crier does is use trusted hardware. It's called a trust execution environment. For example, Intel SGX, as a way of enabling the user to construct a trustworthy decentralized identity credential on her own. And the idea in a nutshell is that within Town Crier, a system like Town Crier, you can run an application that is tamper-proof. Alice can log into her bank account through this tamper-proof application. She can do so without revealing her credentials, without allowing them to escape this protected environment. And because the program is tamper-proof, any attestation it emits, any credential it emits, is trustworthy in the sense that a third party knows, provided that SGX provides all the security guarantees that's supposed to, that the credential was issued by this particular program. Assuming then that the third party trusts the code, the credential is trustworthy. The only problem with this approach is that you need to trust trusted hardware in order for it to work. And there are many, because of weaknesses recently evinced in SGX, that don't like trusted hardware. But for those who do, this is a more direct and more efficient approach to achieving the same goal. Okay, so at this point, having gotten the building block out of the way, I can discuss Candid. Candid involves the use of a committee, a collection of nodes in some network, like an Oracle network, for instance. And we assume that some fraction, a majority fraction, say, 2/3 fraction, are honest. This committee, we presume, has the ability to store secrets securely. And this can be done via secret sharing. So secret can be parceled out among the different nodes in the network. Another goal of the committee is to verify proofs of the type that you saw emitted by Candid. So now the credential issuance process can look something like this. Our user now goes to any number of existing websites, like the Department of Motor Vehicles, Social Security Administration, bank, or whatever, logs in, views information of the type she would like to use to prove something to the committee, and then proves to all the members of the committee, or at least some requisite subset, some quorum, the thing she would like to prove in zero knowledge. Right? She doesn't present all the data she receives directly. She just proves in zero knowledge that the data she receives from these authoritative sites supports her claim. And the committee, if these zero knowledge proofs check out, can jointly construct, jointly sign using threshold signature or individual signatures, a decentralized identity document on behalf of the user. The beauty of this approach is we can turn any web server or collection of web servers, as in this case, into an issuer without making any modifications to those servers. So in principle, we could launch this system today without requiring cooperation from the Social Security Administration or the Registry of Motor Vehicles or any of the other sites that the system uses. In fact, they can be completely oblivious to the fact that users are leveraging data from these sites in order to construct decentralized identity credentials. Another nice feature of this system is that the committee only learns the data that the user wants the committee to learn. In this case, for example, Alice can prove she's over 18 to the committee, present a zero knowledge proof based on received data without actually revealing her birth date. The committee learns only that she's over 18. We get legacy compatibility. As I said, there's no need to modify any of the servers participating in this protocol. And additionally, we can construct attestations or decentralized identity documents of essentially any type we like. As long as there's an authoritative website somewhere out there with the data in question, we can construct a decentralized identity document using that data. Now, unfortunately, DECO is not blazingly fast. It is practical to construct credentials of the type that I described, but it does require some work on the client side. And these are figures that are subject to considerable improvement, particularly with various performance security trade-offs. Because the two-party computation has an offline and online phase, I present the figures here in split form. And also we'll mention that much of the bottleneck here is bandwidth. That if you're operating on a slow connection, internet connection, for example, 5 megabit per second connection, then the offline phase of the DECO protocol can take a number of minutes, 8 to 10 minutes. If you're on a fast connection, because as I said, the bottleneck is bandwidth here, then the offline phase can take just a matter of seconds. The online phase, as you see, itself just takes a number of seconds. And as I mentioned, if you're willing to use trusted hardware, all of this can be blazingly fast. Well, you remember that another challenge I mentioned for decentralized identity to achieve fruition is the challenge of key management. So Alice gets these decentralized identity credentials, but she's got to manage the private keys associated with these credentials. And as I mentioned, users are not great at managing private keys. Candid also provides a vehicle to help users manage their private data in a more seamless way. The idea is the following. When Alice registers with the Candid system, she provides her private key to the committee in secret shared form. And the committee will store her key on her behalf. Because it's in secret shared form, of course, no individual node knows the key. And then she registers accounts held by her with a number of service providers of her choice. Could be Twitter, Facebook, Google, whatever service provider she likes. And she provides to the committee a proof that she's able to log into these target accounts. Now, if she loses her key, she can repeat the process. She can log into the accounts that she's registered with the Candid committee and prove nothing but the fact that she's able to log into these registered accounts, and the committee can furnish her private key for her. So in the normal course of usage, Alice might have her private key stored on her phone. If she loses her phone, drops it in a puddle, for instance, all she needs to do to recover her key is log into a collection of accounts that she has pre-registered. And of course, she can do this in a threshold way. She might register these 3 accounts, but require that she successfully log into only 2 of them to recover her key. And the user herself can set this policy. We could accomplish something very similar using, for example, OAuth. The problem with OAuth is that it reveals an account identifier that we would prefer the candidate committee not have, because this account identifier can be used to link a candidate account, in that case, to a user's real world identity. That's something we would like to avoid for the sake of privacy. Thus, DECO seems better for this purpose than OAuth. We can also achieve with Candid the Sybil resistance that I mentioned before that is so important for applications like voting. The main approach that we take to achieving Sybil resistance is what we call the unique ID approach. We presume here that users have access to some type of unique identifier. For example, a nationally issued numerical identifier like a social security number. And what the candidate committee does is ingest this number presented by the user in a privacy preserving way, apply a PRF pseudorandom function to it using secure multi-party computation, and generate a privacy preserving identifier that can be used to deduplicate users. So when Alice goes to register with Candid, she presents her social security number in a privacy preserving way. It's secret shared across the committee. Committee applies a PRF to it using secure multi-party computation, and out pops some derived value that can be placed on a registration list. Whenever a user registers with the system, the resulting PRF value is placed on a list that's known to the committee. And now, if the same user tries to register twice, she will end up presenting the same unique identifier twice. You only have one social security number, at least most people do in the US. Present the same number twice. The candidate committee, the second time, will derive this PRF value from the presented social security number and can check it against the list of registered PRF values. And if it's already there, the committee knows this user has previously registered. So we get deduplication, and at the same time, no committee member learns Alice's social security number. Now, not everyone has a unique identifier issued by a national authority. So another approach that we have built into Candid, which I won't get into in detail, is what you call the fuzzy matching approach. So the idea here, and we're all familiar with the challenge of matching misspelled names to previously registered ones. The idea here is that a user relies on name and address, nationality, other types of collection of information that's used in a number of contexts to identify users uniquely. For instance, sanctions lists, essentially financial blacklists, will include this information for target individuals. And because biographical information is prone to small errors, you see some examples here, courtesy of Starbucks, matching the name presented by a user to an identity system with a registered name or other information has to be performed in a fuzzy way. And we have to take these small potential errors or misspellings or inconsistent transliterations into account. A natural notion of fuzziness here would be something like edit distance. So we consider a user's presented name to match a registered name if the edit distance is below some predetermined threshold. It's relatively easy to compute edit distance if you're not concerned about privacy. If the names of all the users who'd registered with Candid and their addresses and so on and so forth were known to the committee and were presented in the clear to the committee at the time of registration, it would be easy to implement this approach. The challenge is implementing it with privacy. And this is something we need to do using secure multi-party computation. That's the approach that we take in Candid. Right? So when a user attempts to register, the user presents her name in a private form, secret shared form. The committee has a list of, again, in private form, of all the users that have previously registered, and secure multi-party computation is used to determine whether there's a fuzzy match, a match to within the predetermined edit distance tolerance between the presented name and the registered name. A similar approach can be used for things like accountability. What I mean by that is having users prove at the time that they register that they're not on target blacklists. And in this case, we can use a zero-knowledge proof rather than secure multi-party computation. So for instance, if Scrooge McDuck wants to register with the Candid system, what he can do is construct a proof that his name is not present on a given blacklist, like the OFAC sanctions list. Right? And he can do this non-interactively and present the zero-knowledge proof to the committee to show that the committee can register him without any sanctions violation. I have just a couple of minutes left. I wanted to mention very briefly an example application for decentralized identity that I can imagine coming about in the fairly near future. Today, decentralized finance loans are typically over-collateralized. That means that to borrow a certain amount, say $100, you need to provide a smart contract with an excess of that amount in cryptocurrency. If you want to borrow, say $100 in stablecoins, you would have to deposit $150 in ETH in a system like, say, MakerDAO. The question is, why is this useful? Why not just sell the deposit? It turns out this is good for leverage. In particular, if you believe the price of ETH is going to rise, what you can do is deposit some ETH, withdraw some stable coins, buy more ETH, get more stable coins, and rinse and repeat until you get a factor of 2 or 3 leverage. But so this is all very useful, but it's really only useful for obtaining leverage, for long bets on the target cryptocurrency. It does have the advantage of not leaking much sensitive information, right? No more than the basic blockchain or cryptocurrency does. Conventional bank loans today, on the other hand, are typically under-collateralized. That's to say that the value of the assets you provide to secure the loan is less than the value of the loan itself. The nice thing is that bank loans can be used essentially for any purpose, right? To buy a house, to buy a car, so on and so forth. But the approval process is slow and laborious, and it involves sending lots of sensitive data around. Here you see a checklist of the documents you need to provide to take out a mortgage. Providing these documents, for anyone who's gone through the process knows this, is extremely onerous. There's a movement afoot to create a form of decentralized finance loan that is under-collateralized. Looks like a conventional bank loan, but operates in the DeFi world. There are companies like Teller and LendDeFi, probably others. These are the only 2 that I'm aware of that are attempting to do this. What they do is they ingest data from a would-be borrower, analyze in the cloud, and then the lenders in a lending pool vote on whether or not to grant a loan. Now, in principle, the data are analyzed in the cloud and lenders just get a digest of the result. Sensitive data doesn't get leaked to the lenders, but somehow the data needs to get to the cloud. It needs to get there in an integrity preserved form. And additionally, this sensitive data is sitting somewhere. It's sitting in the cloud. It's sitting in software that's been created by the company or organization that has created this lending platform. Decentralized identity can help address both of these questions. Right? In particular, you've seen how systems like DECO and Candid can enable users to get data into the cloud in a way that preserves integrity. And you've also seen how users can provide credentials that are just digests of essential information. A user could provide a credit score, for instance, that was computed according to an algorithm specified by one of these protocols without providing inputs explicitly to the cloud. So decentralized identity can address both the challenges of integrity and privacy here. I'm out of time. I just want to show you some photos of the Candid team here and emphasize that Jasleen Malvi and Deepak Maram, whom you see circled in yellow here, led the project. Candid is hot off the presses. It just appeared yesterday at IEEE Security and Privacy. If you're interested in learning more, you can visit my website. You'll find both the Candid and the DECO papers. Thank you.
Thank you, Ari, for the nice presentation, and congratulations on the Oakland paper.
No,
let's give a round of virtual applause to Ari. And now we have time for questions and discussion. So I will suggest that whoever has a question writes it on the chat, and I will read it out loud here to Ari. So far we have already some questions. So first is from Felix Engelman, and he's asking, in the shared setup with a three-party handshake, is it still possible for Alice to send secret data to the bank, for example, login credentials, in a way that Bob cannot decrypt the symmetric encryption?
Yes, so using secure two-party computation, they can jointly encrypt data furnished by Alice without Bob seeing the data. And that is essential, of course, right? Because Alice needs, for instance, to send her password to the bank in order to log in. So we need and we have that facility.
Samar Tipari is asking, TradFi measures ensure that borrowers cannot take on more loans using loaned funds. How do you prevent this from occurring in the DeFi setting?
Sorry, I didn't quite understand the question. Okay. Could you repeat it?
Yes, so TradFi or TradFi measures ensure that borrowers cannot take on more loans using loaned funds. How do you prevent this from occurring in the DeFi setting?
From preventing users from taking on multiple loans, for instance.
Exactly, to reuse them.
Right, yeah. I don't know how platforms like Teller, for instance, plan to prevent users from going to a number of different systems and taking out loans such that they end up grossly under-collateralized, right, and are stretched thin. Some form of coordination would presumably be needed among these different platforms, which isn't difficult to achieve on the face of it. To achieve in a privacy-preserving way could be a research challenge. I don't know what approaches they're intending to take to address that problem. And that's a problem in the real world as well, incidentally, not surprisingly.
We have also one question from HB. So what makes DECO so bandwidth intensive from the numbers that you showed in the slides?
Well, it's a secure two-party computation that makes it so bandwidth intensive. We've not been able to figure out ways to reduce the bandwidth substantially without some type of privacy security trade-off. For example, it is possible for Alice to proxy her connection to the bank through Bob if you're not worried about the connection being hijacked in a way that would substantially reduce the bandwidth. But using a purely cryptographic approach, we haven't yet gotten the bandwidth requirements down. I expect that in the future, we or somebody else will be able to develop techniques to do that.
But maybe a follow-up from my side, in the sense, like in this slide with the numbers, you showed that the approach with the town crier was way faster, it actually improves the performance. Was that with a single trusted hardware, or that's a number, or if it's only with one, how does it look like when you have a distributed or like more than one trusted hardware?
Well, it's an embarrassingly parallel operation in the sense that Alice can use multiple pieces of trusted hardware simultaneously, and she can initiate distinct connections to the bank. So it would take no longer to perform that protocol with multiple pieces of trusted hardware. Now, of course, there is the question of whether the trusted hardware Alice is using belongs to her or resides in the cloud, and which one is acceptable depends upon your threat model and the requirements of the user. But trusted hardware is, as I said, blazingly fast. The only problem is you need to trust the hardware.
Thanks. So we have another question from Ali. Is the committee that you're using in your approach different for every person, or do you have a fixed committee for every user?
It's possible for a user to use whatever committee is willing to accommodate the user. In some sense, this question is orthogonal to the design of Candid. You can have a multiplicity of committees. You can have a user, for instance, choose the nodes that she feels comfortable with in a particular committee to form her own subcommittee. All of that is flexible and really depends on the policy of the platform the user is employing.
So we also got a question from Andrea Bracciale. It's regarding the approach that you showed for the Sybil nodes or the Sybil attacks. So he's asking, how did you deal with the case that I registers Ari's social number before Ari has the opportunity to do it himself? Is this a problem?
It shouldn't be a problem, because in order to present your social security number, you would presumably use a decentralized identity credential, which would mean that you were able to log into the Social Security Administration website and prove to a verifier, trustworthy verifier, that the Social Security Administration website said, this is your Social Security number. In other words, to assert that a Social Security number is yours, even in a privacy preserving context, you need to have proven that it was yours to begin with. Right? This is what decentralized identity enables you to do and what we would do in our setting. So as long as it's not possible for one user to compromise the account of another, a user will only be able to present social security numbers or a social security number that she's entitled to.
So we are a bit over the time, but if there are some questions, we can still take one or two more. Okay, so if not, then yeah, thank Eri again for giving this nice talk and give the keynote today.
Thank you very much for having me.
And yeah, now we are off for a break, and we will reconvene again in the o'clock at 4 UTC, 4 p.m. UTC. See you in 10 minutes. Thanks, Eri. It was really nice.
Thanks very much, Pedro. Thank you, Christian.
Okay, so in the meanwhile, while we wait for the break, if there are any of the authors of the next paper privacy-preserving decentralized cryptocurrency exchange, and you want to test the slides, this is a good moment, I would say.
All right, that sounds good. I'm just going to give that a go then. Does this work?
Perfect. Yeah, we can see them the full slide.
Great. Sounds good.
So Okay, welcome back, everybody. So now we are gonna have 3 talks. For each of the talks, we have a slot of half an hour. So we are gonna have about 20 to 25 minutes talk, and then between 5 and 10 minutes for Q&A and discussion. And yeah, without further delay, the first talk is gonna be given by Thor Frederiksen. I hope I pronounced it more or less correct. And today he's going to talk about privacy-preserving decentralized cryptocurrency exchange. Whenever you're ready.
Yes, thank you. Thanks a lot for the introduction. So yeah, I'll be talking about P2DEX, or privacy-preserving decentralized exchange. This is a joint work between me and my co-authors, Carsten Baum, Bernardo David. And so, yeah, let's get into it. So just a short outline of what I will cover in this talk here today. First, I'll start a bit of introduction about blockchain-based exchanges and how it works so far, and the many problems that have been associated with it. I'll then introduce a couple of the tools we need for our decentralized construction, which is basically digital signatures and different flavors of MPC. Afterwards, I'll show how to shake all of these things together to get our protocol. And then in the end, I will conclude with a bit of implementation detail and like practical consideration. Okay, so how has blockchain exchange worked so far, like in general? If we consider the case of a standard approach with a market order exchange, we basically consider a bunch of users that have some tokens on different chains, and some sort of service provider that wish to provide the option to exchange, such as Mt. Gox in this case. So what happens is basically the users, they send their tokens to this centralized authority, and based on some exchange rate and a fee, this authority says, okay, you get this and this of this and this token, and basically sends this back to the users, and everyone is happy, ideally. So first of all, what's good with this like market order standard approach? Well, it's quite efficient, like both in regards to computation, in regards to rounds of communication and amount of transfers on the ledgers. What's bad is, of course, that this is highly centralized, which allows for well, theft, hacking, and a whole bunch of other things. In particular, more than $5 billion so far has been stolen by hackers on blockchain-based exchange servers, and because of the inherent pseudonymity of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, it's been very hard to do anything about this. Even like the case I mentioned here in the example, Mt. Gox has lost $500 million worth of currency due to a hacking attack. So this is clearly not good, and this is just in regards to attack. Like other things is basically now you have a centralized authority that sets the rate, which also allowed for manipulation, which I will return a bit to in a bit more detail in a second. Fortunately, there's been a lot of research in this area because of these issues. So there are approaches do exist on how you can exchange across different blockchains without having to trust a completely centralized authority. One of the simplest and most prime ways of doing this is to use an atomic swap based on time locks, which basically prevents the stealing and the hacking of tokens. Basically, I mean, the idea is you lock your tokens in one smart contract on one chain with a specific secret, and then the party wish to exchange with does the same for their token on the other chain in a way that's linked to the same secret. So this basically means that once one person takes out the money, then the other knows the secret to be able to take out the money into their account. So this works quite well, although it's inherently a very two-party peer-to-peer based setting. And besides actually working well, you end up with a bit more latency in regards to finalization time before a transaction is complete compared to like the centralized approach I mentioned. And finally, users must be online all the time for this whole. They need to sit around and wait for the things to go through before they can make their next move. Of course, this can also be issued in a bit of a more service-oriented way by using exchange chains, where you swap into tokens on an exchange chain, which then keeps tab on how of tokens you have on the original chain and allows some sort of internal exchange on this chain and cashing out, which again is nice in the sense that it prevents stealing and hacking, but still has like quite a bit of latency, and is inherently not private. In particular, this allows for market manipulation, in particular the setting called front running, which basically means that knowing orders, knowing how much people want to buy and sell for before it happens, allows for market manipulation for a profit. So I should elaborate a bit more on this, because so far I just mentioned a market order approach. But what we are actually really interested in, and what reflects like the real world, so to speak, is more a limit order based approach. And this is exactly where front running can be a big issue, especially if we consider high frequency trading. So if we consider what is going on in a standard limit approach, well, limit order approach, well, we basically consider a specific matching algorithm. Usually this is based on an order priority of price, time of order, and then quantity. So this means there's basically a big order book where there's selling orders and buying orders, where there's an identifier for the individual who wait for the order of selling and for the order of buying, containing a minimum, respectively maximum price of whatever token in question, along with a quantity and a timestamp for which this order arrived. So the way a matching would occur is basically you start from the bottom of the selling list and the top of the buying list, and you check whether these orders are compatible. Basically meaning is there an intersection between what is accepted as a minimum price and selling price and a maximum buying price. You can see in this case there is a matching between Fred and Gabby. So basically a price is decided. This can, for example, be the average. And then this order is marked as like the order to carry through first. Then you have the second order, which is basically which then continues down the list of the order that was fulfilled, since Gabby only had 0.02 tokens. This order is fulfilled, and there's still some left of Fred's order. So then the next one is compared. Is this okay? Well, yes, it is. So a price is decided for this order. Now the order of Fred has been finalized, so we move up to the next one in the line in the selling, and that's Eve, and then it's checked whether this is still applicable with the price of Harold. We see it's not. So basically we end up with, well, one and a partial order being matched in this case. And what is crucial is that all this information about how many, about the quantity and about the acceptable price being known before the orders are being matched can clearly lead to a manipulation, and basically, as the name suggests, run in front of the line with an order in order to make a guaranteed profit. So our goal with all of this in mind is first of all to prevent theft and hacking. Then we also want to prevent front running, and we want to do this in a way that's both user friendly and with a low latency. And like the toolbox we use for all of this is, in the spirit of blockchain, is a sort of decentralization. Okay. So with this in mind, let me just go through the specific tools we are using here for our protocol. The first tool we need is distributed digital signatures, which is basically the same as, I won't go into detail here, it's basically what you expect. It's the same as regular digital signatures, except that the signing key is now shared between multiple parties. that constructs a partial signature, which can then be combined into the actual signature. So if you consider the setting where there's a user with a message, the user shares this with a bunch of servers that each have a share of the key. They send back a partial signature, which the user can then combine and pass on to whomever needs to verify this. What's crucial here is that we need this to be compatible with standard schemes. And basically, we need the verifier to be agnostic to whether or not this signature has been constructed in a distributed way or in a regular way. There's a bunch of approaches of how to achieve this using standard schemes such as RSA or ECDSA. And I will not go into any detail with this. The second tool we need is MPC. In particular, we need a flavor of it called outsourced MPC, which is basically just like regular MPC, except the servers that execute the MPC protocol does not have any input or any output. This is the input and output is done by external clients. And this can basically be achieved black box and standard MPC schemes using very efficient techniques independent of the function to be computed. The overall idea is basically that each user constructs a secret authenticated share of their input and sends this to the servers, which the servers then use as input to the MPC computation. In the end, the servers in MPC construct a shared output that's also authenticated and secret shared, which they can then send to the users in order for the users to finally learn their respective output. So the last piece we need is another type of MPC, which is called incentivized MPC, done by my co-authors and third person, Raphael Dowsley. Basically, the idea of this is to incentivize the servers in an MPC computation financially to complete the whole computation and not abort once they learn some information. So the idea is that they use a blockchain where they send some, and a smart contract where they send some tokens into the smart contract as ante for the computation. Then they basically do the MPC computation like they would, but in a way where the output is secret shared. Now they can commit to this secret shared output to each of the other servers, and if everything goes well at this point, they can send their shares. Everyone learns the output. Everything is good. If one server then learns the output before they send their share and decide to abort, well then we have a problem. But fortunately, that's where the ante on the smart contract comes into play, because now we have commitments and shares, and the other servers can simply prove to the smart contract that a server has aborted or is behaving maliciously, and then they will get penalized. So in this way, we basically get a notion of fairness against rational adversaries. We furthermore get an identifiability of malicious acting adversaries. And most importantly, we get a sort of binding between MPC computations and smart contracts, where the privacy-preserving aspects are handled off-chain in the MPC contract instead of on the smart chain itself. On the blockchain itself. Okay, so with all of this in mind, let me try to present the idea of our protocol. So basically, first of all, there's a small setup phase where the servers set up an incentivized MPC scheme. So the way they do this is they basically, they first use distributed signatures to generate a public key and shares of secret keys. For some ledger we call an exchange ledger, which is sort of a control ledger. Then based on this, they deploy a smart contract on this ledger where they put in a whole bunch of ante, which will only pay out if it gets a signature based on the shares. If it gets signed out with a signature based on each of the shares the servers hold, or if it receives a proof of the malicious behavior. And I will return to what this actually means later. For now, just note that there's every server has put in a bunch of ante, and it's locked nice and safely on this exchange ledger and can only be taken out if all servers collaborate or if some proof of malicious behavior happens later on. So now what we actually do when we want to do an exchange. For simplicity, let's just consider two parties because I don't have enough real estate on the slides for showing more. But basically, for the two-party setting, we have the situation where two-party comes along, Alice and Bob. Alice holds some bitcoins on one ledger, and Bob holds some Tether on another ledger. And well, Alice wants some Tether, and Bob wants some Bitcoin. So they want to carry out an exchange. Of course, here, like this generalizes to a lot of parties, so they don't know. Of course, it's not just a two-person matching and swapping here. So basically, the idea is that each of those parties, they have some addresses or conversely public keys for each of these ledgers where they hold their money and where they want the other tokens to go. Yeah. So the way we start this is basically they each they each construct a limit order, like I explained earlier, and sends this as input to an outsourced MPC computation to all of the servers. The servers then construct a burner address, a temporary address on each of the ledgers where the parties can transfer their tokens to. This burner address is again controlled in a distributed manner using a distributed signature scheme. So in practice, this will basically almost always be ECDSA. I just showed how this was for Alice. It happened similarly for Bob. And now Alice and Bob can simply transfer their tokens to this burner address. And at the same time, the servers can execute an outsourced and incentivized MPC computation based on the transaction information they got from all the parties. In the end, they find out the order matching, which they then all learn and sign off on. Now, they basically just need to perform a distributed digital signature signing the tokens out of the burner address and into the recipient address. And in conjunction with this, they can also, take a fee depending for performing this this exchange. And once this is done, then basically the exchange has been completed. So this is the case if everything goes well and there's no cheating. So as I mentioned, we put up ante on the exchange ledger in case to prevent any kind of to incentivize honesty and basically have a fallback option in case of cheating. So let's consider what happens if some of the servers are acting maliciously. Well, if just one server chooses not to take part in the digital signature to sign the money out of the burner address, well, then the money is basically burned, right? Then they're locked there forever. But if that happens, then we can use the idea of incentivized MPC, where the honest servers or just one honest server sends a claim to the smart contract on the exchange ledger to basically say, hey, I have not heard anything from the other servers. They're acting malicious. Please do something. And then what this exchange ledger will do, this claim will, of course, involve the information and the distributed signatures all the servers have previously agreed on, and will thus contain information about which parties have put in a bunch of ante into the different ledgers. So this exchange ledger will then basically use the ante of the malicious parties to refund the parties whose money basically got burned. If we, on the other hand, consider what happens with a malicious client, well, not a lot, because the client are actually not doing anything interactive in this protocol. They are issuing an order in a one-shot protocol to the servers, and then they're transferring their money to the burner address. Since the money being transferred to the burner address is on the public ledger, the servers can clearly see if that has been done or not. So if it hasn't been done, well, then they just ignore the input of this party that was supposed to transfer the money. So a malicious client really can't do much in this protocol. So So what do we get from all of this? If we consider an amortized setting where basically we consider the servers only put up ante once and then continue running flows of the limit order matching, we get a very efficient solution where only 2 sequential transactions per exchange per client is needed. So what I mean with this is that the client needs to transfer the money to the burner address, and then after the computation, the servers must transfer the money from the burner address to the recipient. And this is on par with what's done in the centralized solution. We also, in the optimistic case, when nothing goes wrong, we actually don't need to use any smart contracts at all. All we need is the burner addresses and basically accounts on the blockchains, on the blockchains to exchange from. If we compare this to the atomic swap, well, the atomic swap also only uses 2 transfers or 2 transactions, ideally per client, but there's a latency of actually 3 transactions that must be finalized on the blockchain because the one client must wait for the first client's initial transaction to complete before they can issue theirs. And so you end up with a longer latency in this case than you actually do for our solution. And besides this, in regards to the overhead I mentioned, you also need to issue smart contracts and compute hash digest in these smart contracts. So you have quite a bit more work there. When it comes to security, basically our protocol is secure against the dishonest majority. So we can handle all servers except one being corrupted. We get public verifiability, both of the exchanges actually being written to the chain, and we get proofs of servers that act malicious due to the incentivized NPC. We've proven this secure in the global UC model, and as I mentioned, finally, because the limit order matching is done in MPC, we prevent fund running since everything is kept hidden until the end. On top of this, what we actually get, if you consider this in a deployment setting, is we get something that's quite practical, at least from the client point of view, because we can realize this with a very lightweight client, since the client just needs to make one transfer of their tokens on a blockchain and then give outsourced input to the MPC. The outsourced input part is very, very lightweight. So this can easily be realized in a browser, like using MetaMask and some JavaScript. So this also means we get an exchange as a service where the clients just pop in, make their transfer to the burner address and send the order, and then they can log off and just wait for the money to get exchanged and come back to them. So we implemented the MPC aspects of this in Fresco, which is a framework for MPC that's implemented in Java. That's based on the speech protocols. We use speech 2K, which is a protocol of speech that works over rings. So 2 to the power of 32 or 2 to the power of 34. And we constructed a limited implementation that considers a static quantity of tokens to be exchanged. As I mentioned, we only implemented the MPC part to basically give a feasibility result for this. In regards to the threshold ECDSA signatures, we need a flavor with identifiable abort, which has been shown most recently by Gennaro and Goldfeather. Although they're not super efficient, they work, and they are not that they're not going to be that much of a bottlehead, as I will show. Furthermore, the implementation by Gennaro and Goldfeather is not optimized and it's running on the laptop, and this is a very active area of research, so we wouldn't worry too much about this. So the implementation of our matching protocol, we can see that even running in MPC, I should mention this is just the online phase. There's some pre-processing as function-independent pre-processing as well. On a LAN setting, we get less than a few seconds in execution time for certain types of orders up to 128. And on the WAN setting, we get it with less than 40 seconds. So despite this sounding like a bit much, maybe, we actually noticed that it's not too bad. First of all, the ECDSA signatures, we need quite a few, since we need 2 for each order, ends up becoming way more computationally cumbersome than the MPC. But what's the real problem here is ledger finalization. Even an efficient ledger like Ethereum, you need 3 minutes to finalize a transaction to be sure it's gone through. And in Cardano, it's, for example, 10. And we need 2 of those in sequence, like the same as in the centralized setting. So this turns out to actually be the bottleneck, in particular when we take into account that all the MPC and half of the threshold signatures are basically pipelinable while we wait for the blockchain finalization in an optimistic setting. So we actually end up with something that's quite efficient in practice compared to the framework we already have to work with. So basically, just to summarize, we get decentralized exchange without front running based on MPC. We get this in a dishonest majority public verifiability. It's practically efficient, yeah, that's basically it. Thanks a lot for your time. Let me just go back and end on this slide. I think this is better. Yeah.
Thank you a lot for the nice presentation and keeping it on time. So we have actually some time for questions now. So as before, please, if you have any question, write it in the chat and I will read it out loud to the speaker. So while people start filing these questions, maybe I have one already. So in the part of the incentivized MPC, you mentioned that the servers need to lock certain collateral, certain coins into the ledger in order to punish them afterwards.
Yeah.
So do you have, can you elaborate a little on what is the exact amount of collateral that they need to lock in order for them to be better to behave than?
So this depends if you wanna, if you're talking like a normal bank or if you're talking like insured refundability, because I mean, like to ensure that every client gets the money refunded in case one server is malicious, then every server must input as collateral the max amount they want to exchange in one limit order matching.
Right.
Like if you compare to banks, I mean, I think it's like between 5 and 10% that they would need in a similar setting to keep in collateral. So you could argue that this would be enough to basically incentivize them not to, since if the servers are malicious, they can only burn the money, they cannot earn anything. Right. So it depends on exactly how you want to do this. Yeah.
Makes sense. And maybe a follow-up in that sense, like you mentioned, like there is this smart contract that they have to put on the ledger that encodes the logic for the punishment.
Yeah.
How expressive this contract has to be, and can be done in any other cryptocurrency other than Ethereum, for example?
Oh, I mean, it can be done in any like cryptocurrency with the Turing complete language. So I mean, like what we implemented was just the MPC part. So we haven't done like the details of the contract. So I mean, it also depends. Like what I introduced here, sort of the bare bone protocol. You have a bunch of different extensions and cases you might want to add as well. So it depends a lot on that. I mean, it wouldn't be just like it wouldn't be like humongously complex, but it wouldn't be like 5 lines either.
I can see. Okay. Okay, I have more questions, but I guess it's not good that they take all the time for me. So please make your questions on the chat. So we have one from Christian Cachen. So you mentioned you just implemented the MPC part.
Yes.
How many times more effort is needed for the real system?
That's a very good question. I mean, there's of course already source code for like the threshold ECBSA signatures and things like that. It's like, of course, the majority of the bulk of complexity is in the MPC. But like in practice, it would take quite a lot of effort to make everything work together in this case. Like, I mean, there's a lot of different parts that must work together. And I think that would basically that would be where you would put 80% of your implementation effort.
Right.
Thank you.
Sure.
We have time for one last question. if not from the library, then I do it. So one thing that was not clear to me was that, okay, there is the users that put their money in the burn addresses, I think you call them.
Yeah.
Then they have to outsource the information for the exchange to the to the servers. And of course, because you are using MPC, they don't see exactly the information or the original information from the users. I'm wondering whether the users, by looking at the blockchains where they actually lock the coins with the burn addresses, they could learn some information. For example, if I lock 3 Bitcoins in a certain address, and they see what is my address, they may learn that I have 3 coins.
That's a very good point. And like in the base case, I mean, this is what they would learn. Like you would ideally, what you would want to do is, of course, to hide how much you want to exchange in the transaction, and then basically have the servers refund back. But now you end up also in a bit more of a complex situation, where the client actually has an option of cheating and providing inconsistent information. So you need a bit more logic to handle this. It's like a hugely complex thing to like make this whole thing deployed. I mean, just as companies like Coinbase and Binance, even in a centralized manner. So this is just like, also the presentation has just been like the more minimum approach of how to achieve the cross-chain exchange.
Perfect. Yes, sounds super interesting. At least for me, it's really interesting, this topic.
Cool, thanks.
Okay, any last quick questions from the audience? Okay, if not, then thanks again for participating in the workshop and giving us this talk.
Welcome, thank you. Thanks for having us.
And now we are gonna make to the next talk, which is gonna be given by Lukas Aumeier. He is from the Technical University of Vienna. And he will talk about a recent paper called Blitz, Secure Multi-Hop Payments Without Two-Phase Commits. So Lukas, whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Pedro. Let me share the screen. Okay, I think you can see it now, correct?
Yes, now we can see it. Go ahead.
Okay. Let me remove this window here. Okay. Yes, hi again. My name is Lukas Aumeier, and today I will present to you Blitz. This is a joint work together with Pedro Moreno Sanchez, Aniket Kate, and Matteo Maffei. And this work is accepted to this year's Usenix Security Symposium. So what is Blitz? Blitz is a new multi-hop payment paradigm for payment channel networks that is more efficient, reduces the collateral lock time from linear to constant, reduces the contract size, and is more secure against certain types of attacks compared to current payment channel network payment solutions. Let me begin by giving some motivation and background. So why do we actually care about this? As most of you might know, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies have an inherent scalability issue. So we have the blockchain, which is a global distributed data structure that records every transaction that is done in the network. And on top of this, we have a global consensus through which everyone checks the whole blockchain in order to verify transactions. And this, among some other things, highly limits the transaction rate of cryptocurrencies. So if we, for instance, look at Bitcoin's transaction rate, we will see that it manages only about tens of transactions per second, which is not a lot if we compare it to more centralized systems such as Visa, which can handle peaks of tens of thousands of transactions per second. So it's a quite big difference. One approach to solve this is actually to move off-chain and not record every transaction on the blockchain. Instead, we keep most of them off-chain and use the blockchain mostly for fallback in case of disputes. And among these off-chain solutions, payment channels have emerged as one of the more promising ones. And let me briefly now explain to you what are payment channels and how do they work. So assume we have two users, Alice and Bob, and these two users anticipate multiple payments between one another. So what they can do is they can open a payment channel as follows. They come together and they post one transaction on the blockchain that locks some of their individual coins into a shared output. Then from this shared output, they again create a new transaction off-chain that spends back their individual balances to them. This is the initial state of the channel, and the channel is then considered to be open. Once it's open, they can perform arbitrarily many payments between one another simply by creating a new state off-chain that redistributes the according balance according to the payment that they want to conduct. So they can go ahead, create multiple of these states, exchanging the balance back and forth until they are happy and wish to close the channel again. So what they can do then is they can go ahead and close the channel simply by sending the latest state again to the blockchain. So notice that even though they can perform arbitrarily many payments between one another, only 2 of them actually are captured on the blockchain. Of course, now maintaining a payment channel with every user you potentially want to interact with requires you to lock up a lot of funds, and this might not be feasible. So instead, it turns out we can actually go ahead and take payment channels and link them together to form a payment channel network. And in such a payment channel network, any 2 users that are connected via a path of channels can perform a payment between one another. And then probably the most prominent example of a payment channel network is the Lightning Network. And we can see by looking at some current numbers that this is actually used in practice. So there is like $53 million worth of Bitcoin locked in the Lightning Network. There are around 21,000 nodes and 46,000 channels in the Lightning Network. And now let me briefly go over how the payments currently work in the Lightning Network. So assume the following scenario. We have Alice who wants to pay 5 coins to Dave via Bob and Carol. So there's a channel between Alice and Bob, between Bob and Carol, and between Carol and Dave. So what they do is they go ahead and Dave samples a random pre-image X and sends Y, which is the hash of X, to Alice. Now Alice goes ahead and sets up an HTLC or hash time lock contract with Bob, holding 5 of Alice's coins. And an HTLC is nothing more than a simple smart contract that can be scripted with the rather limited scripting language of Bitcoin and encodes the following logic. So Bob will get the 5 coins that Alice put if he knows X, such that X hashes to the condition Y, and Alice can get back her money after some timeout. In this case, it's 3T. Now, Bob will go ahead and also set up an HTLC with Carol, and Carol will set up an HTLC with Dave. Now, of course, Dave knows the pre-image X, so he can redeem the HTLC with Carol excuse me, by revealing X and thereby claiming the 5 coins that are locked in the HTLC. By doing this, Carol will also know the pre-image X, and she can go ahead and redeem the coins that are locked in the HTLC with Bob, and Bob can do the same with Alice. And now the payment is successful. Let me point out some important points of these types of payments. The first one is that these types of payments require 2 rounds of communication. And by round of communication, we mean a sequential and pairwise communication from the sender to the receiver or the other way around. And indeed, we can see that we require this round 1 in which we lock up the money, and then the round 2 in which we release the money again. And we also dub this the 2-phase commit scheme, because it is not unlike the 2-phase commit schemes that are used in distributed databases. Another thing I want to point out is that these types of payments require a staggered collateral lock time, meaning that the lock time is linear in the path length. And why is this the case? So normally in the case that we have honest users, the payments are settled off-chain. So what they would do is, for instance, Dave and Carol would go ahead and so Dave shows Carol the pre-image X, and they would honestly update their channel to represent the new balance where the 5 coins have moved from Carol to Dave. But of course, there might be the situation where someone has to forcefully claim the money from the HTLC on the chain. And in order to ensure that the intermediaries have enough time to react to such a claim in their right channel, we need to increase the timeout of the HTLC in their left channel in order to ensure that they have enough time. And here, as you can see in this picture, the timing grows from T to 2T and to 3T. All right, so now let me go over some of the other properties and drawbacks of Lightning payments. So one thing is the Lightning Network actually is a solution to the scalability issue that I described in the beginning of the talk. It also achieves, so Lightning payments achieve balance security, which means that honest users that participate in the payment cannot lose coins. And the third thing I want to point out is that the Lightning payments achieve privacy in the sense that in an optimistic payment, the intermediaries will only learn about the direct neighbors and the value that is being sent, but they won't learn, for instance, about the whole path in the case of an optimistic payment. However, there are also some drawbacks in Lightning payments. For instance, as I already mentioned, we have this staggered collateral lock time, meaning that if a payment fails, then the collateral will be locked for a time that is linear in the path length. And payments can fail for different kinds of reasons. Users can go offline. There could be malicious users. So for instance, there is actually an attack, the griefing attack, that where adversaries intentionally let payments fail in order to decrease the network throughput, or there could be some other errors. And due to the fact that the collateral is locked for a time linear in the path length, this can lead to a decrease in the network throughput. Another thing is that, as I mentioned, the scheme takes 2 rounds of communication. Additionally, we require HTLC scripting to be supported in the underlying blockchain. And finally, these types of payments are susceptible to the wormhole attack, which is an attack in which honest intermediaries are cheated out of their fees. So let me now go over the Blitz construction, which achieves all these properties, but also improves on these drawbacks. And the way I will present it is I will start by giving a simple way of doing payments in one round, point out some problems with it, and then incrementally improve it until we arrive at the solution. So let's start with a simple first attempt of doing one-round payments. So again, we have the scenario where Alice wants to pay 5 coins to Dave via Bob and Carol. And a very simple approach could be one where, okay, Alice and Bob, they go ahead and simply update their channel such that the new channel state, in the new channel state, Bob has 5 coins more than before. So actually, in the new state, Bob received the 5 coins from Alice. After this has been updated, Bob will go ahead and update his channel with Carol in the same way, such that the 5 coins move from Bob to Carol. And then Carol will do the same with Dave. So they all honestly update their channels, the coins move from left to right, and the payment is done. And this is actually used in the interledger payment scheme. Of course, we can see that this might cause some problems, especially if we have intermediaries that can be malicious. So one thing that could happen, for instance, if we have a malicious Bob, what he could do is simply stop the payment, so he does not forward this to Carol, and he will effectively have stolen the 5 coins from Alice. So this is not good. So what we will do to try and solve this is the following. So we can try and introduce a refund mechanism to this scheme. Okay, so what does this mean? So Alice will now, instead of updating the channel with Bob directly to the state in which Bob gets the 5 coins, update the channel with Bob to an intermediary state that holds the following contract. After some time T, which is chosen by Alice, Bob can claim the 5 coins that are locked in this contract, right? Before time t, however, Alice has the way to refund herself. Okay, now Bob goes ahead and does the same with Carol. So he creates the same contract, and Carol does the same with Dave. Now Dave can send back a confirmation to Alice where he says, look, Alice, I received this payment, so it's actually fine. And Alice will go ahead and simply go idle. And after the time t expires, the money will move from left to right in each channel. If she doesn't receive the confirmation, Alice can go ahead and step back from the payment by simply publishing the refund, and the subsequent users will follow. Of course, this scheme now has two problems. So the first one is that the way it is shown here, everyone can trigger this refund. So what we actually want is that only Alice can trigger it, right? So I mean, if Alice deems the payment successful and goes idle, she doesn't want that Bob, for instance, posts a refund. And the second thing is that the timing is the same for everyone. So if the refund is posted at the last possible moment, the other parties might not have time to react. So indeed, what could happen here, again, we have a malicious Bob. And even though the payment was actually successful, Bob goes ahead and publishes the refund just before the time t expires. And the others won't have time to react. So in the other channels, the payment goes through. And in this case, Carol will have lost the 5 coins and Bob will have stolen them. Right. So there would be one way how we could solve this. And this is the following. We could introduce again some hash condition where this time Alice chooses a pre-image and all of the refunds are conditioned on this hash condition, right? This prevents that anyone but Alice can trigger the refund. And in order to solve the problem of the time, we could again introduce some staggered time so that it grows from left to right in this case, in order to ensure that if someone refunds in the last possible moment, then the user on the right will have enough time to react and refund themselves. But of course, this doesn't solve what I promised you earlier. So this requires the same scripting requirements as the Lightning payments. And again, we have a collateral time that grows linearly. And also for instance, for the refund case, we would have, again, this more or less this second round. So it is, again, sequential in a sense. So instead, we came up with the following, and we dubbed this solution the pair-revoke paradigm. And the way it works is as follows. So we have Alice, who defines a timeout t, which is similar to the timeout t from the last slide. So it's a constant time in the future, and it is independent of the path length. Following, Alice creates a refund-enabling transaction TXER that contains an output belonging to each of the users on the path, except for the receiver Dave. Right. Now, Alice goes ahead and creates the following contract with Bob. And this contract looks similar to what I've shown in the last slides. So again, after this time t chosen by Alice, Bob will get the money. But before time t, Alice can refund, but only if the transaction TXER was published before by Alice. And the way this can be done is simply by using this output in TXER that belongs to Alice as an input for her refund transaction. Right. After this, Bob will go ahead and create the same with Carol, and Carol will go ahead and create the same with Dave. Now, Dave goes ahead and sends back a confirmation of the TXER that Carol used in their channel for her refund transaction back to Alice. And now there are two different ways. So either the confirmation is a correct one, meaning that the TXER that Dave sent back to Alice is the one that Alice created in the beginning. And in this case, Alice can simply go idle because she can be sure that after the timeout t expires, Dave will get the money. And this is because Dave sent back this confirmation that ensures Alice that the refund that Carol uses in the channel Carol Dave is dependent on Alice publishing TXER. So if she doesn't publish it, that means that the money will go to Dave after this time t. Right. The second case is, of course, that Alice does not receive the correct confirmation, or she does not receive a confirmation at all. In this case, Alice will post the transaction TXER in time before the timeout T expires, and everyone on the path sees this at the same time and can react and refund themselves. Right, so note that this payment scheme takes only one round of communication. Okay, there are some other improvements for these payments, which unfortunately I don't have time to go over them in detail, but I will just mention them here. So remember that the time t is constant, so it's independent of the path length, and it can be relatively short. However, in the case that there are only honest users, you still might not want to wait until this timeout T expires, which is why we introduced the fast track for payments. And this is an optional second round of communication for efficiency reasons, which we can use to achieve also these instant payments, similar to what we have also in the Lightning network in the case of honest payments. The second thing is a fast revoke, which allows the users on the path to refund themselves or to revoke the payment without requiring to post the transaction TXER or without actually requiring to post any transaction on chain. And this is actually important for instance, if you set up a payment and there is not enough balance for this payment, or a user is offline and the users simply want to revert the payment. The third thing is that we can achieve the same privacy as the Lightning network by introducing stealth addresses in the outputs of TXER, and thereby we can again hide the path of the payment except for the direct neighbors of the intermediaries. And I encourage you to check the paper for more information on this in case you're interested. Now let me move on to the evaluation. First, let me compare this to some current payment solutions. I've already shown you this interledger payments, the ILP, which actually achieves the payments in one round, but of course it doesn't have the balance security. So also we have the Lightning network, which does achieve balance security, but again, the Lightning payments require 2 rounds of communication, require collateral lock time that is linear, and it is also susceptible to this wormhole attack that I briefly mentioned. The next thing is this AMHL, or the anonymous multi-hop blocks, which unfortunately I can't really go over in detail, but this is an improvement on the Lightning that makes them secure against the wormhole attack, more or less. And finally, our construction, it achieves the balance security. It has this 1 round constant collateral and is also secure against the wormhole attack. So now for the evaluation. So we actually did 2 kinds of evaluations. In the first one, we created the necessary transactions for the Blitz payments. And we actually noticed that the contracts used in Blitz are 26% smaller than the Lightning contracts or the HTLCs. And this can lead to an increased number of concurrent payments per channel. So why is this the case? So the channel states are stored in transactions, and transactions have a limited size. And of course, the outputs, so the outputs of this transaction, they can represent the concurrent payments. So if we decrease the size of the contract of these outputs, as you see in this small figure, we can actually fit more payments into one transaction. So this is why we could increase the number of concurrent payments in practice. The second thing is we did a simulation in order to showcase the advantage of having constant collateral over staggered one. And for this, we took a Lightning network snapshot and we created some random payments on it. And some of these payments are disrupted, which means they fail for some reason, either due to some errors, users being offline maliciously, so on. And the failed payments, the collateral of them is locked either for a constant time in Blitz or for staggered or linear time in Lightning. And of course, collateral that is locked in a channel cannot be used for other payments. And then we ran the rest of the payments, and we actually found out that depending on the setting, so actually how many payments are disrupted, how many payments do we send through the channels, and what value do this have, we found that we have between 4 times and 33 times fewer failed payments in Blitz than in Lightning. Now to sum up, we introduced a new multi-hop payment paradigm, the pay or revoke for payment channel networks. And in it, we achieve secure multi-hop payments in one round of communication. We reduced the collateral from linear to constant, reduced the contract size by 26%, and we are secure against wormhole attack. On top of this, we require only signatures and time locks, so we don't actually require hash locks. We did a simulation to show the practical advantage of having constant collateral. We formally modeled the protocol in the universal composability framework and gave security proofs. And let me finally mention also that the payment scheme is also compatible with current Lightning Network channels. So thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to some nice questions. And here are also some ways of contacting me.
Okay, thank Lucas a lot for the presentation. Let's give a virtual applause. And now we have time for Q&A questions. So please, if you have any question, write it in the chat. So we have one from Felix Engelman. Thanks for the talk. How is the privacy impacted by the communication between the sender and the intermediate hops? They need to be aware of the TXER.
Yes, so they need to be aware of the TXER, as I mentioned. And if we do it like I shown you in the presentation, then of course the path is immediately leaked to everyone, because via the outputs, you can see the identities of the users on the path. However, as I mentioned, we have this extension where we actually use stealth addresses. So this means that the sender can on its own create fresh addresses under the control of the intermediaries that are unlinkable to them. So this means that if we employ these stealth addresses for the outputs of TXER, then we do not have this path leakage anymore. And then actually an intermediary that sees the TXER, he will only be aware of his direct neighbors.
All right. Any other question? Of course, I can ask some questions, but I'm also an author of the paper, so it would be a bit unfair, I guess. Okay, well, we give times to the audience to give questions. So maybe one, Lucas, from my side. So you mentioned that the protocol is compatible with the Lightning Network. So have you contact with the Lightning Network developers, or is there any contact in practice that can be actually deployed?
Yes, so we actually have contacted some of the developers of the Lightning Network and spoke with them. And so they said they will look at the paper, of course, and they have to check it out more. But there's one, we also presented the paper in Sydney in a Bitcoin meetup, and there's one person, this Lloyd Fournier, who said he might implement this, a prototype of anyway.
Mm-hmm. So we got a question from Aravind. So he's asking, are stealth addresses compatible in Bitcoin?
Yes, they are. So you can actually use them in order to create fresh addresses. Yes.
Then, as mentioned in the prototype, that's cool to have. Okay, we have a question from Itai Sabari. He thanks you for the talk as well. He's asking, what are the assumptions regarding the time locks?
Sorry?
What are the assumptions regarding the time locks?
So regarding the time locks, there are some constraints, of course. So I mentioned this T, right? And of course, this needs to be some time in the future. So there are several transactions that need to be published in order. So first we need to publish this TXER, and then we need to close the channel, and then we need to publish the refund transaction. So we need the timeout capital T needs to be at least the time it takes to perform these sequential steps, right? Actually, it should be a bit larger than this, and the sender then has to be sure that he actually posts the refund in time, so this T minus these steps that I mentioned, so that that in his own interest, he has enough time to refund himself, and subsequently also the others have time to refund themselves.
Okay, so we have time for one last quick question, if you have it. If not, then thanks, Lucas, again for participating and for preparing the talk.
Thanks for having me.
And now we are going to move to the last talk of this session. It's going to be given by Augustin Stoy, a student from the Delft University of Technology. And he's going to talk about Bitcoin compatible virtual channels. So, Augustin, whenever you're ready.
Thanks. I assume you are seeing my screen?
Yes.
Thank you.
See the presentation.
Okay. I will talk about Bitcoin compatible virtual channels. This is a joint work together with Lucas, Andreas, Sebastian, Christina, Matteo, Pedro, and Siavash. And this work has been published in IEEE SMP 2021 yesterday. So in this work, we achieved efficient, privacy-preserving, and cheap payment solutions for the cryptocurrencies. Thanks to the previous talk, I will be brief on the motivation of the payment channel networks. As Lucas also mentioned in the previous talk, we have a scalability problem in the blockchain systems because of the fixed size of the blocks and also the average block time. And because of this limited transaction throughput, we also have high transaction fees. And one of the proposed solutions for this is the off-chain protocols, where the transactions, some of the transactions are moved to the off-chain systems. And the payment channel networks are one of the prominent ones. So as already explained, the payment channel has 3 phases. First, parties lock their coins in by creating a transaction on the blockchain. And once a channel is created, let's say in this example, Alice puts 10 coin and Bob puts 10 coin. Then after the transaction is published on the blockchain, the channel is created. And let's say if Bob sends 5 coins to Alice, then they exchange message about this. And then Bob sends another 3 coins, and then so on. And once they are done with their transactions, then they can go to the blockchain and then claim the coins from there. This is good because it's the updates of the system is only off-chain, meaning that these transactions don't need to be published on the blockchain. However, it still requires on-chain creation and the closure of the channel. And it's not feasible to have a create channel with everyone. That's why an improvement on this is proposed by payment channel networks. And the idea of payment channel network is that if there are already deployed channels between, let's say here in the example, 3 parties, Alice has a channel with Ingrid and Ingrid has a channel with Bob. So now in this example, if Alice wants to send some coins to Bob, instead of creating a new channel or making a transaction on the blockchain, what she does is that she sends 5 coins to Ingrid, and then Ingrid forwards these 5 coins to Bob. And thanks to this payment channel network structure, everything can still be offline, all the transaction can be offline. But this system has some drawbacks. One of them is that Ingrid needs to be active and online during this process, because Ingrid needs to update her channel with Alice and her channel with Bob for every transaction happening between Alice and Bob. Another drawback is that there's no privacy for the individual transactions between Alice and Bob. Since Ingrid is seeing all the transactions, she can know that the amounts for each individual transaction. And lastly, because of this involvement of the Ingrid, parties need to pay a fee for the Ingrid for each transaction. And to improve this system, virtual channels has been proposed. So the idea with the virtual channel is that instead of creating a new ledger channel, which requires a transaction on the blockchain, can we create a virtual channel using the existing ledger channels? And the idea of virtual channel has a similar structure like a ledger channel. It has a create phase where parties agree on how much coins they will have in this channel, and then the update is similar. And at the end, when they are done with their transactions, then they can close this virtual channel by returning to the ledger channels. And the advantage of this is everything is again offline, and Ingrid only needs to be involved for the creation and the closure of this virtual channel. So Ingrid doesn't need to be involved for every payment between Alice and Bob. And because of that, it also provides privacy for the individual payments between the parties. However, until this point, the existing solutions for the virtual channels require powerful Turing-complete smart contracts. And this brings me to our contribution. With this work, we achieved the first construction of the virtual channel, which are compatible with Bitcoin-like limited scripting, Bitcoin-like blockchains, which have a limited scripting language. And it's also compatible with the UTXO model. In this work, we formalized our construction in the UC framework. We provided the security proof in the UC framework again, and we implemented our construction and compared with the existing systems. And that's being said, now I can move to our constructions. So for the high level overview of our idea is that, let's assume that we have two channels. Alice has a channel with Ingrid and Ingrid has a channel with Bob. And initially we see the initial balances in these channels, bottom of these channels. And to create these virtual channels, first we do update in the existing ledger channels. So what we do is that we assume that for a ledger channel where each party wants to have a C coins, what we do is that in both ledger channels, we subtract C coins from both parties. And then we create this virtual channel, which has C coins in both sides. And in addition to that, we also have 2C collateral, which is important for the balance security of the parties. And once these transactions are exchanged between these parties in an off-chain manner, then the channel is created. And once the channel is created, then the update in this virtual channel is done in the same manner as ledger channel, which only requires exchange between Alice and Bob. It doesn't require anything from Ingrid. So assume that these parties exchange several transactions, and at the end, let's say all coins are now in the Alice's side, and then they want to close this virtual channel. So what they do is that they close this virtual channel by updating their existing ledger channels. So at the end, what we achieve is that here we can see that Alice has C plus coins and Bob has C less coins. From Ingrid's perspective, the total coins of Ingrid didn't change. So this is the balance security of Ingrid. And as you can see from here that virtual channels are almost the same with the ledger channels, except the fact that they are not funded on the blockchain. And because they are not funded on the blockchain, it comes with several challenges. One of the challenges is that any party in this protocol try to prevent the closure of this virtual channel. So parties can refuse to update of their ledger channel, which is necessary for the closure of this virtual channel. And for the balance security of the parties, we need to ensure that the latest state of the virtual channel is publishable on the blockchain. This is the first challenge. The second challenge is that malicious channel updates may prevent the publishing this virtual channel on the blockchain. Because as I said, this virtual channel is funded by underlying ledger channels. And if one of this ledger channel, let's say the channel between Ingrid and Bob, is updated maliciously, then Alice cannot publish this virtual channel on the blockchain because that state is not available. And for that, we need to ensure that Alice has a way to receive her coins from this virtual channel. How are we solving our challenges? For the first challenge, where any party shouldn't prevent the closure of the virtual channel, we have offload mechanism. And the offload mechanism enables to publish the latest state of the ledger channels on the blockchain. And once this ledger channel states are published on the blockchain, then our virtual channel transforms to a ledger channel. And then we can rely on the balance security of the ledger channel systems. But if a malicious user updates their ledger channel, then the offload will not happen. And then for that, we have a punish mechanism. And in the punish mechanism, malicious parties lose their all coins and honest parties are financially compensated. And now we can move on to our constructions. We have two constructions, and the first construction is virtual channels with no validity. In this construction, the virtual channel and the collateral are funded in the same transaction from both ledger channels. And because of this construction, the end users don't have a control. Since they don't have a control on the other ledger channel, they cannot directly offload the virtual channel, but they can initiate the offload of the virtual channel. And if it doesn't happen, then they can punish the intermediary node with their ledger channel. So for Alice's case, if the offload is not completed, then Alice can punish the Ingrid via their ledger channel. And same goes for Bob. Bob can initiate the offloading of the virtual channel. If it doesn't happen, then Bob can punish Ingrid via their ledger channel. And for Ingrid, since Ingrid has a control in both ledger channels, she can always offload the virtual channel and claim her collateral. So in this mechanism, Ingrid is in control and should react if one of the parties wants to offload the virtual channel. This being said, these offloading and punishment mechanisms are only necessary if one of the parties are malicious. In the honest scenario, everything will be taken care of in offline message exchange between these parties. And our second construction is virtual channels with validity. And this validity means that the channel has some expiration time, which we call as the validity time. So in this construction, the virtual channel is funded in one of the ledger channels and the collateral is funded from the other ledger channel. And in this example, the virtual channel is funded by the channel of Alice and intermediary Ingrid. Because of that, Alice can always offload this virtual channel until the validity time. And for Bob, Bob needs to wait the offloading of this virtual channel to claim his coins from this virtual channel, of course. But if this virtual channel is not offloaded until the validity time, then Bob can claim his coins using his ledger channel with Ingrid. And for Ingrid, Ingrid also needs to wait until the validity time for the offloading of the virtual channel or honestly closure of the virtual channel. If this doesn't happen, Ingrid can punish Alice via her ledger channel with her. And in this second construction, as you can see, Alice is in control, and Alice needs to close this virtual channel before the validity time, either honestly by offline messages or by publishing the latest state on the blockchain. So if you compare both of these constructions, in the non-validity case, as you can see that the virtual channel and the collateral are combined in one transaction in a symmetric form, whereas in the validity case, the virtual channel and the collateral are separated in two transactions, and each of them are funded in two different ledger channels. But here, one thing is important to notice, mention is that the collateral is funded by the virtual channel, meaning that the collateral cannot be spent before the virtual channel is offloaded. And in the non-validity case, as I mentioned, Ingrid is in control, whereas in the validity case, one of the end users is in control, and in this example, Alice is in control. And in the non-validity case, there's no limitation of time limitation for the channel, so it can stay as long as the parties want to. Whereas in the validity case, there's an expiration time for the virtual channel. And now let's move on to the security and the security of our model and the comparison with the previous results. So our virtual channel should have additional properties which were not available for the ledger channel systems because it's only for two parties. Since in this mechanism we have three parties, one intermediary, we need additional security properties for this intermediary party. And one of them is that Ingrid, the intermediary party, shouldn't have to be stuck as the intermediary indefinitely, meaning that at some point Ingrid should able to claim her collateral. And in non-validity case, we achieve this basically because Ingrid can always offload the virtual channel and claim her collateral. For the validity case, until the validity time, the collateral can be stay because the virtual channel can be stayed open. But at that point, either the virtual channel should be closed or Ingrid can claim the collateral. So in both cases, we ensure that eventually Ingrid can claim her coins back. And secondly, the balance security for Ingrid. So in both cases, we are ensuring that the total coins of Ingrid will not be changed. But this doesn't mean that her balances in each individual channel will stay the same, because we are ensuring that the total in both channels should be the same. And in addition to these properties for the intermediary node, we also have the ledger channel properties, security properties for the end users, for Alice and Bob, and thereby their balance security is guaranteed. And when we compare this with the existing works, as I already mentioned, the existing works rely on smart contracts, which can have any arbitrary message, and any Turing-complete arbitrary message can be used for this creation of the system. And that's why this mechanism doesn't require punishment for the virtual channel, for the malicious behavior in the, if one of the parties try to close this channel misbehaving. And this is because of the smart contracts can guarantee successful offload of the virtual channel. For our case, we don't require smart contracts, we only require time locks and signature verification. And this is available in almost every cryptocurrency. This makes it compatible with most of the existing cryptocurrencies having scripting abilities. But because of the UTXO model we have and the limited script language, our solution requires punishment in the case of misbehavior. Now let's move to the performance and evaluation of our system. In this work, we had proof of concept implementation of our protocol. We deployed our protocol in the Bitcoin test network, and then we measured the transaction overhead for each operation of virtual channel construction. Here we see the table of the results. I will not go into the details of each value, but one thing I can express is that here you can see that for both our constructions, the size of the transactions or the total size of the messages exchanged are quite similar. And one thing to note is that for create, update, and close parts, which are used in the honest normal execution of the protocol, there's no on-chain protocol, as we mentioned. And only if there's a dispute in the system, we have the offloading and punishment transactions, which are cost around $40 US. And these numbers are taken during the submission of the paper. Currently, I believe that it's around $70. But one thing also to notice that here the update of the channel requires only two transactions. And if we compare our system with the state-of-the-art implementation of the Lightning Network, here we can see that for the Lightning Network, for each payment, it requires 8 transactions between parties. And this each payment again requires around 3,000 bytes of message exchange, whereas for our virtual channel constructions, in addition to our initial creation of the virtual channel and the closure, which are only one-time cost, each update requires only 2 transactions and around 700 bytes of communication cost. So as you can see from this graph as well, because of our only one-time cost for the creation and the closure of this virtual channel, just after one transaction, virtual channels are more efficient than the payment channel networks. And finally, let's look into the fee consideration for our system and the payment channel networks. For the payment channel networks, and specifically for the Lightning, for each payment, the parties pay fee for the intermediary nodes for their service. And this fee is calculated from the base fee, which is fixed for each transaction, and the fee rate, which is proportional to the amount of coins you are transferring. So if we assume that there are n payments from Alice to Bob with the total amount of cash, then the total fee they will pay will be n times base fee plus the fee rate times the cash. Whereas in our construction, and this is because the parties charge for every payment, whereas in our construction, since the ingrid is only involved in the creation and the closure, we don't need to pay ingrid for each individual payment. We only pay one-time base fee and the proportional amount to the transaction carried in this payment in the virtual channel. And this brings me to the our summary of our work. So in this work, we achieved virtual channels with Bitcoin compatible virtual channels with very limited scripting language abilities in UTXO model. We formalized our system in the UC security model, and then we provide the security proof. We evaluated our system in the Bitcoin testnet, and then compared our result with the Lightning Network. And for the future work to improve our construction, one idea is looking into the recursive virtual channels, which are built not only on top of 2 ledger channels, but also on top of virtual channels. And with this recursive virtual channel, we can achieve not only 2 hop payments, but also arbitrarily long payment hops. And another thing to look for is the support of this virtual channel construction when the parties go offline. In other words, watchtower support for the system. And this concludes my talk. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Okay, so thanks, Ozan, for the talk, for preparing it. We have plenty of time for questions and discussion, so please write your questions on the chat. Okay, so there's one question from Christian Kashan. So first, he's thanking you for the illuminating presentation. So you said 2 transactions for setting up a channel should be added to the same block. How does one control this?
Sorry?
So you said at some point in the presentation that 2 transactions for setting up a channel should be added to the same block. How does one control about that? So how one can control that happens?
Is this a ledger channel creation? Like, I mean, at the beginning, when we create and close the ledger channels, then it's only one transaction happening, but this transaction is funded by the coins of both parties.
Maybe Christian, if you don't mind.
Okay, yeah, I get it. It works. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, if I said 2 transactions, yeah, that's my mistake. So it's one transaction which is funded by the coins of 2 parties. For the creation and for the closure, it's the same.
Thank you.
So we also have a comment from Orpheus. Thanking you first for your talk. But the question is, how is the fee paid to Ingrid decided? So how do they decide how much fee they pay to Ingrid?
Well, the fee is decided in the same manner in the Lightning protocol. So the idea is that in the fee, the base fee is basically given for the Ingrid being online, and the fee rate is given for the amount of coins exchanged between parties. So this will be the same like in the Lightning. So the Ingrid will decide how much she would like to charge for this operation, virtual channel operation. But it would be something similar to Lightning.
Okay, thanks. More questions? While we give time to the audience to think about questions, so I have one maybe. So you presented 2 constructions, so one called virtual channel with validity and the other virtual channel with no validity. Why 2 constructions? Do you have concrete use cases that you will think that one is better than the other, or how do they compare?
Well, in the non-validity case, since there is no time limitation, if you want to have a channel which you don't have let's say a time limit, you want to close it. So I would suggest to have the non-validity case. In this case, Ingrid, the intermediary party, needs to be online and checking that if one of the parties wants to close this channel. In the validity case, the channel time is limited to the validity, but at the same time, it provides some advantages for the intermediary party, Ingrid, because in this scenario, Ingrid doesn't need to go online until time validity to check if there is anything malicious happen. So in the second scenario, Ingrid just can come online just before the validity time and check if there's something malicious or they want to honestly close the channel. For the non-validity case, Ingrid is in control and this comes with the responsibility. So Ingrid needs to check that if one of the parties is trying to close the channel.
Okay, thanks. We still have time for a couple of questions more. If anybody from the audience has some question. Okay, so I have probably one more open-ended one, but okay, first, Elena Fuentes is asking, okay, first, thanking you for your talk. And then it's asking, in practice, how long does a channel live time-wise? So how do you see, how long will a channel be time-wise in your opinion?
Virtual channels. Well, it depends on the application, and the idea of using virtual channel, as I also showed in the evaluation part, maybe it's also here easy to see that. So if you are making only one transaction, it may not be very practical to have virtual channels. So if you are planning to have multiple transactions, which may include micropayments, then it's better to have virtual channels. And how long you would have it, it depends on the application. And it might be have a limited time if you want to use the validity case, or if you want to just keep it open, then you can use non-validity. It depends on the application. As long as the ledger channels are still open, the virtual channel can stay open.
Mm-hmm. Perfect, thanks. There is another question from Aravind. So he's asking, from the two options that you have, validity and non-validity, which one performs better, or is there a trade-off between them?
Well, we are just seeing in this slide is that in non-validity case, we have one less transaction, but the total size of the transactions are a bit higher than the validity case. So in the performance, they are almost the same, very close. And the trade-off is, as I explained, it depends on the application, and it depends on the role of the intermediary node. So if you want to have a channel to stay for a long time, then you should use the non-validity case. And if you want to have a service where which should end in a sometimes constraint, then you should use the validity case.
Perfect. I have been saying that he got it, so thanks for the answer. Okay, time for one last question from the audience. If not, then yeah, thank August again for preparing the talk and participating in the workshop. And with that, we reach the end of today's session. Thanks all the authors and Ari, the keynote speaker today. Thanks the organizer for organizing this nice workshop. And we reconvene again next week, the same day, same time, with another set of one keynote and 3 fantastic talks about blockchain. So with that, see you all next week, same time. Ciao.
Thank you. Bye.